All right, well, the first thing I'm gonna do now is pull off the transmission, because just like with a 256, these slip yoke ends always cause me problems when I hoist the engine up out of wherever it's sitting. Just dumps transmission fluid everywhere. And the only remedy I know for that is to use the tail shaft piece, but it's attached to the drive shaft and just sounds like a pain in the ass, so I'm not gonna do that. Break transmission off, get this thing up on a stand, start tearing it down. That's what I'm gonna do. Well, I was really hoping I wouldn't have to see this flywheel again for a long time, but here we are. So let's pop it off and get this engine up on the stand. Well, we're on the stand, so now we can begin tearing the motor down. I've started disassembling the engine here. I've got the valve cover off and what's left of the front timing cover. And basically what I'm gonna do is remove the timing belt, lock the cams in place with the tool that I have, and try as easily as I can to remove the head in its entirety without having to completely strip everything off of it. I'm not sure yet whether or not I'm gonna do the valve stem seals. I think I probably should, due to the age of them and the fact that they are known to leak. So we might tear into the head a little bit further, but right now we're gonna focus on just getting the bottom half of it stripped down, because we wanna get the block to the machine shop. Another thing I'm gonna be doing with this build is completely removing all these small water lines, the throttle body heater, the oil filter sandwich plate cooler, I think it is, I'm not sure, but what I'm going to be doing is welding an AN fitting on here and here, and that's going to be the supply and return for our turbo, which is water cooled and oil cooled, so the rest of it will all be deleted. All right, I got the cam gears lined up. I didn't lock them in place because I did a little research that showed me that this little piece of tin here actually tells you exactly where they need to line up when you set the timing, so I'm not worried about that. I got the head bolts broken loose. I'm pretty sure that the head is ready to come off. I am gonna have to remove this bolt real quick so that this water pipe doesn't pull out of the, actually I guess it could pull out, it wouldn't really matter, but I'm gonna do it anyways. And then we'll pull the head off and hopefully everything goes smooth. I'm not gonna trip on anything. Well, I pried on it for a good minute or two and realized something must be holding it up. I just couldn't figure out what it was. And then I realized that the intake has this huge mount arm that connects it to the bottom half of the block. And that's exactly what it is. So we'll break those loose and try again. All right, round two. I'm confident this time. What do you know? There it is. Oh, this is heavy. And caught on something great. Man, I thought aluminum was supposed to be light. I swear that head plus the intake setup is heavier than the 6-cylinder that comes off of my BMW E30. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm just weak today. But we are down to bottom end. And everything here looks pretty good. No holes, which I wasn't expecting, but I am expecting the rings to be worn out. If not the rings, probably just valve guides, but I really doubt it was the valve guides the way this thing was smoking there towards the end. So we're gonna go ahead and pop off the oil pan and the front accessories and rip out those pistons. We're getting closer. I was trying to remove the front hub off here and ended up destroying the timing belt, so I made a new one of those. It's kind of recommended anyways, but it was brand new, so Kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Almost ready to flip this thing over and start popping out the connecting rods and main caps. Just got to get this off. Got the crankshaft out, rods, pistons. We're basically stripped down to a bare block now, so I can go and get this dropped off to the machine shop and get it bored out for what we need. And hopefully we'll get it put back together within a week or so. I don't know, it depends on how booked up the machine shop is, but all the parts look pretty good. No spun bearings, no problems that I could see. Even the rings looked okay, so I can't say 100% that they were what was causing the burning oil, but I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. So get back with you guys when it's time to assemble. Catch you later. Hey everyone, so I finally picked up my Mazda block from the machine shop. I only had to get it bored just slightly and honed. I didn't have to get it decked or anything like that. So here we are, and what I am doing now is fitting up the cylinder bores with our new hardware here. We got manley rods and wiesco pistons. I'm going to be running the stock crank, wiesco rings, which I'm setting the ring gaps on right now. Got my little ring gap file, some feeler gauges, and most importantly, my instructions. So what the instructions are calling for is a ring gap for the first ring, somewhere around 0.016, and the second ring is 0.019, I believe is what it was. So the first cylinder that I checked, it's the lower ring was okay, so the top ring I just had to file out 1.5 thousandths of an inch, and it's fitting pretty decently, so I'm ready to move on to the second one here. So for those of you who don't know how to check and set a ring gap, essentially what you do is you take your ring and you keep the gap side up, push it down into the cylinder, turn it sideways, take a piston, use it to square the ring up in the bore, and then you use your feeler gauge. We're aiming for I think it's 16 thousandths, and perfect. We're right where we need to be on that ring. So we can now move on to the second cylinder, and it's also very important to try and keep, you probably can't see it, but the gap on the ring square. You can kind of see it there. And I'll give you a better demonstration here on the picture, but that's how it says the rings should be in the cylinder. So we're ready to move to number two. 2 down, 2 to go. So far I'm finding that the top ring is the only one that needs to be adjusted, and only very minimally. Second ring is like right where it needs to be. So in my experience, that's actually pretty rare dealing with LS parts, especially with wiesco, because that's all I really use in my LS builds. But what can I say? I'm happy about it for sure. Okay, we got all 4 slugs in, so we're gonna go ahead and rotate the block over and get the crank set back in. It's probably a good idea to get the oil squirters installed before you put in the pistons, but it's probably not a big deal if you don't, like I forgot. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get them reinstalled real quick before I install the crankshaft. All right, so I got the bottom end mostly assembled. The main bearings I reused because the clearances were good and they looked really nice, so I went with them. And the rod bearings were new because they're new rods, and the clearances also checked out on those, so got everything buttoned up. And now I'm just waiting on a new timing belt so I can put on the rest of the front accessory drive. But today we're going to be working on changing out the valve seals, because just in case it wasn't the rings, I don't want to have to tear the top end of the engine apart again just because it burns oil. So what we're going to do is remove the cams, and then we'll remove the lifters, and we'll see how we can get those springs off, because I've never worked on a head like this before that has castings above the valves. Got the exhaust cam out here without much trouble. The seal's actually still on it, so I gotta check to see if it's still good. I doubt it, but didn't even have to take off the cam gear to get it out. And now we're just pulling out the little lifters here, just using a magnet, and they pull straight out. And there's our valve seals, well, valve stems. So it'll be interesting to try and compress those guys. All right, both cams are out of the head, and taking a look at the front cover here is a good indicator whether or not your cam seals are leaking. I don't have a lot of oil residue and buildup on it, so I think that the seals are good. So we'll leave those alone. And now I have to figure out how I'm gonna get these little keepers off of the valve stems there so I can remove the spring assembly and get down to the seal. All right, so in order to compress the valve springs, I've gone ahead and taken off the intake manifold, and I've come up with this little tool idea from browsing the internet. I took my biggest C-clamp, which I've never really used for anything, and I tack welded a piece of 1-inch tubing onto this side. And this side's gonna sit up against the face of the valve, and on this side I've made another little part or tool out of 1-inch tubing, and it's gonna sit like this, and this part will push down on the spring seat and allow the keepers to come out off of the valve stem. And it's kind of very similar to a lot of DIY tools I've seen online, but I just made it work with parts that I had. So let's give it a shot and see how it works. All right, it was pretty successful. The tool's a little bit cumbersome to use, but it gets the job done. It's hard to say whether or not these seals were bad before I took them out, but they're definitely bad now. So I don't have my new ones yet, unfortunately, but we'll just go ahead and strip the entire head right now. And that's what it looks like without a valve. Figured I'd give you a demonstration of how I'm using this tool in case anybody else decides to attempt this. So I don't have a lot of space to get it around the head, but it just barely clears. And line it up over the face of the valve. Make sure that you're sitting on top of the spring inside. I like to make sure that the foot is centered on the valve, because the whole reason I welded that piece of 1-inch tubing on there is because the overall size of the foot is just a little bit larger than the valve itself, and I don't want to dig into the casting at all of the head. And yeah, all you gotta do is just tighten it a few turns, and the spring retainers fall right out. Back it off and move on to the next one. I got 2 left on the exhaust side, or I mean intake side. tell you what, putting this back together is not going to be as easy. But I don't think we'll have too much trouble. Alright. Intake side is done. Spring retainer, spring, and valve. All right, well, I got all of the exhaust valves out, and now that I'm down here looking into the chambers, I really don't see any obvious signs of oil seeping from this side, so I'm gonna go ahead and say it probably wasn't the valve guide seals, but it's definitely going to be a good thing to have some fresh ones in there. Won't have to worry about it for a long time. So this is where we're at right now. I got everything labeled and numbered where it came from, keeping everything together. All I got left to do is pull out the seals on the exhaust side, and then well, just got our valve seals and timing belt, so it's time to get this engine thrown back together. Genuine Mazda parts. I did a lot of research, and everybody recommended to only go with Mazda valve stem seals because all the rest leak. And I went with a Conti timing belt and Conti tensioner. So I'm gonna start off by putting the belt on the engine, and then I'll start popping the valve stem seals in there. So the reason I had to wait to put the bottom end of the engine back together is because the timing belt has to go on before this, I guess it's like a hub assembly. You see, once I install this, there's no room anymore to put a timing belt on there. So that was a pretty big holdup for finishing the assembly of this guy. And now we'll get the bolt thrown in there, and we'll jump back on the head. KL02 is the exhaust seal for the 99 to 2000 heads, and possibly a few others. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I've already lightly lubed up the top of the valve guides. I'm just gonna go ahead and pop them on, and then we'll get the valves reinstalled. I'm gonna attempt to show you how I'm getting these down on top of the valve guides real quick. So I'm taking my long pick tool and just inserting it through the seal, and then I just drop it down into the guide and let the valve seal fall down there. Stick my thumb down the lifter hole and pop it on. And a lot of times it doesn't seat squarely, so I have to push it with my index finger to get that other edge to sit down. But that's 4 down, 4 to go. A little more efficient method on the intake side here. I got all 8 stacked on there. I'm just gonna drop them down one at a time. Oops. All right, I could get them popped on. All right, I got all the guides popped on. Gonna go ahead and put a drop of oil on each one to hopefully aid in the valve stems sliding through, and we're gonna get this show on the road with getting the springs reinstalled with the keepers. Should be another interesting task, but here we go. So I'm on my 5th exhaust valve, and the first one was really the only one that was kind of difficult in figuring it out. Now, a lot of people online recommend that you use like a thick grease to hold the keeper onto the valve stem and then undo the tension. But I'm finding that I haven't even had to do that. I actually pumped out a little bit of thick grease just for that reason, but I haven't used any of it at all. I think the residual oil that is on the keepers, or maybe even the oil that I put on the valve stems to get it to go through the seals smoothly, is actually enough tackiness to hold the keepers on there. The 3 tools I'm using are 2 different picks and a pair of long needle nose pliers. And I'm taking a keeper with the needle nose pliers just a half after I compress the spring down like that, and I'll show you actually what I'm talking about here. So here's the keeper, and I'll just grab it on the fat end with my needle nose pliers, kind of like this. And if I'm real careful, I can reach it up over the valve stem and set it on top, and then the bottom one I just have to kind of lift up with the two little picks here. So it's working pretty well. I think we'll be done here within an hour. All right, I got all the exhaust valves done. I had a hell of a time there with number 7. I think the tool was on there a little cockeyed, and I tried adjusting it several times, but the keepers just kept on popping out as I would release tension, and I think it's because the top retainer would be dragging on the valve stem. But I finally got it, so now we're gonna flip it over and get the other 8 done. Finally done. The exhaust side gave me a lot more trouble than the intake side gave me a lot more trouble than the exhaust side. Not really sure why. Figured it would get easier as I went, but wasn't the case. But we're done. It's time to get the cams reinstalled. And but first we're gonna throw in the lifters. And by the way, I didn't use any of that grease. Okay. Let's get this rotated. I set the lifters in here in an order from front to back. So this one will go right here. Kind of grimy. All right. So I got the cams installed, and I also got the head installed and the timing belt. So we're well on our way to having this engine in one piece again. I'm gonna go ahead and finish throwing on the accessory drive and the valve cover and whatnot. And if we're lucky, we'll get this installed tonight. Wish me luck. Okay, well, we're all back together in one piece with the drivetrain. I have oil in it. I'm gonna go ahead and get it set back on the subframes, and then tighten up a couple of bolts I couldn't access on the bottom side of the bell housing. And we'll get the motor mounts installed and get this thing thrown back in the car. All right, well, I only spilled a little engine oil and a little transmission fluid this time, but we're back in place, and we're getting ready to lower the body down and make sure the body mounts all still line up. Keep your fingers crossed. All right, drivetrain's back in the car. I'm trying to find my deep sockets right now. For some reason, I seem to have misplaced them, but I think we might be running tonight. Keep your fingers crossed. All right, guys, well, I'm pretty much nearing the home stretch. Just have to finish bolting down the turbo, attach the oil line, and a couple other little things. Everything underneath the car is done, the exhaust, drive shaft, coolant hoses, they're all done. Intercooler piping is done. So yeah, all I gotta do is get the turbo bolted up and the wastegate, and we'll be trying to crank this baby. But I don't think I'm gonna do that till tomorrow because it's already like 8 o'clock at night, so we'll do it in the morning. All right, well, I thought I was being smart working with T56s in the past, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna fill some fluid into the tranny through the shifter here. And as soon as I got the top shifter off, this entire part was just full of fluid, and it's got everywhere, all over me, on the car, under the car. So I would definitely not recommend ever opening that to add fluid. Just a public service announcement. I got everything hooked up, radiator's full, and actually I just realized the turbo drain's not hooked up, so we'll get that connected and then we're gonna go ahead and give this thing a fire. All right, we're gonna give it a shot, see what happens. Please start. Totally forgot to hook up the coil packs plug at the front of the wire harness there, but we should be good to go now. Let's hear this thing run. Come on. Man, what's the problem here? Okay, let's diagnose. As they say, third time is a charm. I was looking around and I realized I didn't set the proper gap for the crank angle sensor, so went ahead and pulled out a credit card and got that fixed, and I'm pretty confident it's gonna fire now, so let's give it a shot. Starts right up. There we go. Rock and roll. Oh, and died. Try it again. Jeez, okay. All right, it's running pretty good, so gonna let it warm up a bit, check the water, and then take it for a test spin. See how it handles now. Then we'll be able to turn up the boost. I don't know if you guys can all see the haze, but I think there's a good possibility I might have just rebuilt my entire engine because my $100 eBay turbo seals are bad. We'll find out shortly.